Hello everybody and welcome to Module 6 of the Gogla EWaste Toolkit. Today we're going to be looking at take back and collection channels. My name is Drew Cobbin, the Programme Manager for Consumer Protection and Technology at Gogla, and also leading our efforts on the EWaste agenda and coordinating the EWaste working group. So firstly, a quick introduction to the EWaste Toolkit. The aim of the toolkit is to identify and share good practice amongst Gogla members and the industry of the different elements of e-waste management. So we've started off looking at a technical introduction to e-waste, then thinking about design for reduction of waste, policy and regulation, financials, e-waste and the consumer, and today is the sixth and final module in our current package, which is take back and collection. So this has been running for about 12 months now, and another aim of the exercise is to build a community of practitioners amongst the industry where we can share and learn and tackle this challenging topic together. We're very grateful to Swedfund, which is the Swedish Development Finance Institute, for funding this initiative and giving Gogla and our members the space to work together on it. As I said, this is the last module in the toolkit, and the toolkit to date is very much focused around knowledge products. So developing the briefing notes and these seminars where we collect and share information. We're looking towards the next phase of the toolkit and our work, and expanding that into more practical tools, guidance and templates to help companies take it to the next level and really integrate a lot of the learnings into their operations. We're still in the kind of early stages of putting that plan and the project together. So if that's of interest to you, then please do get in touch, and I'd be pleased to talk about what your particular challenges are and how we can design it to make it as useful as possible. Cool. Now moving on to today's webinar, we have up to 90 minutes to talk about take back and collection. And we're going to be looking at the three main channels. Company owned, so how the company can get the product back from their customer at its end of life and bring it back through its logistics chain. Third party collection with such as e-waste management companies and recyclers, and then engaging the informal sector. And we're going to be looking around questions on how to raise awareness amongst consumers or market take back schemes, how to design incentives in a way that are cost effective and appropriate, and then how to develop partnerships for these other channels. What kind of actors are out there and how can we work together on them. And this connects nicely with the module 5, e-waste and the consumer, where we were looking at really the consumer angle, the phenomenon of hoarding, what is consumers' awareness of risk and how do they perceive the value of waste, and what are their challenges in disposal or relinquishing that waste. A quick note on housekeeping. All of the slides from today will be shared. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded. You can see the previous webinars on gogla.org/ewaste. There are 5 other webinars as part of this series. All the attendees are in listen-only mode. If you want to ask a question or say something, then please raise your hand and I will unmute you, and then you can speak up. It's also possible to ask a question in the question box. So today we have two fantastic speakers talking about their very practical experience and what they've learned from their activities. Firstly, we'll have Charlotte Heffer, who's the Operations and Business Development Manager at D-Light, talking about one of the pilot projects that they're doing through the Global Leap Challenge. And it's still early days, but I think they've gone a long way in thinking through some of the challenges and what it can take for a company to do take back at scale. And then we'll have a chance for question and answers after Charlotte's presentation. And then we will go on to Daniel Hinchcliffe, who's the advisor for circular economy and sustainable waste management at GIZ. Daniel is a real expert in e-waste from all the different types of waste stream, looking at projects and initiatives all around the world. Some of you may recognize Daniel's name. He was author of the study on battery end-of-life management that we referenced and talked about in Module 1. So yeah, fantastic to have Daniel with us today, and he'll be talking about the informal sector engagements, who are the players out there, and how can partnerships and initiatives be designed to leverage that network. And there's some interesting case studies that he'll talk about from a couple of countries. So one more slide from me before I hand over. This is capturing some of the discussions that we had at the EWaste Festival in Nairobi in July. Some of you may remember we broke into three groups and discussed the challenges and opportunities of these three channels. And we're using this this kind of framework and the insights to build out the briefing notes, which will be developed and shared in January. So if anybody has any new experiences or case studies that they would like to share and contribute, please do get in touch, and we'd be pleased to showcase it in the briefing notes. But otherwise, I would like to hand over to Charlotte Heffer. Charlotte, let me make you presenter, and then you can take us through your presentation.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks, Drew. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I hope you can see my screen. Can you confirm, Drew?
Yeah, we can. Thank you, Charlotte.
Okay, excellent. I'm just going to have loads of messages coming up on the screen, so I hope that those don't disturb anybody. Well, as I said, thanks for joining today. As Drew mentioned, at D-Light, we were fortunate to receive one of the Global Leap Awards for solar e-waste. Just as a little bit of background before I go into the details of the e-waste pilot, D-Light has been looking at e-waste so far in the past only when products have returned to us. So normally we find that products come back to us when they're still in warranty, or when the customer wants them to be fixed and believes they're still in warranty. What happens with those products that we get back, then we certainly process them, we try to repair them, then what we can't repair, we try to reuse, what we can't reuse, we recycle and dispose of responsibly with a certified e-waste provider. But as you can probably all imagine, this is not the bulk of the products that we sell. We have a very low defect rate in our products, and so therefore most products don't actually come back to us. When we sell through to the customer, the product stays in the customer's home or wherever they're using it for a significant amount of time. And when it reaches the end of its life, or when it breaks and it might be considered out of warranty, it generally does not come back to us. If it were to come back to us, we would certainly take it through the same streams. But what we want to do with this pilot, and the reason why we applied for it, was really because we wanted to increase take back. Know that that's the focus of this webinar today, and I just want to be really clear that we understand that there are many other considerations around e-waste, but with our particular pilot project, our real objective is to increase take back. Through that, we're going to be testing out several things about how to best reach our target population. And I mean, how do we reach them in terms of what message do we give them? And then how do we also reach them in terms of the reverse logistics of the products? We're also looking to understand the cost of increased take back. What kind of resources do we have to put into this? Because at D-Light, as I'm sure with all of the other companies working in this space, e-waste actually represents a cost center for us. We have to pay our people to go and collect the waste. We pay people to try and repair it. We pay then for a certified company to take the waste away. But what we're looking to see is really how much is this if we focus on increased take back. And then the other thing that we're going to do, probably like many of the other Global Leap winners, is we're going to collect data around the products that we receive back. So the D-Light pilot is not just for D-Light products. We're going to take back any solar e-waste that we come across within the pilot region. Our country that we're focusing on is Kenya, and we're just focusing on two regions. We're not doing the whole country because the grant's not so much, and we really want to focus on making sure that we capture valuable data. So as the goods return from those two regions, what we'll be doing is we'll be classifying them. We'll be seeing how many of each brand, how many are Light and Global certified, what kind of battery technology was used, and some other things like that. At the end of the pilot, all of this information will become available for everybody because we hope that others can learn from this. Our objectives, as you can see, are not that, we don't know that it's necessarily going to be positive, the outcomes. We could find out that it's very expensive, too expensive for us to do this across the board, or we could find out that actually people don't want to give us back our products no matter which take back methods we try to use. But these are some of the things that we'll be testing, and these are some of the things that we will be able to share with you afterwards. Today, as you can imagine, there are many different considerations and challenges when putting together a pilot such as this one. And today, talking with the Gogla team, we've decided that I will just talk you through 3 specific considerations that we have had, or you might think of consideration as challenge also. I'm just going to give you an overview here, and then I'll speak about each of them for a couple of minutes. One of the things that we really need to consider when we're looking at take back is what message is it that we're delivering to our target population, and how should we deliver that message? The next one is around how to actually reach people that have purchased cash products. As you can imagine, when selling a product like a solar lantern, the sale is often done, it can be done in many ways, but generally speaking, data isn't captured at the point of sale. It's a small product, it's an affordable product, and it's purchased outright. And therefore, we've never collected data in the past about who we've sold cash products to. So we need to think about how we're going to reach these people, and what message do we deliver to them. And then finally, what I'll talk about today is how to incentivize our target populations to return these non-functioning solar products. So first of all, when I talk about the message, we are only in the beginning phases. We're still in the planning phases. We hope to actually start implementing in January. So at the moment, we're actually designing the content of the message and the delivery of the message. So as we go out into these 2 regions, we have to consider what is it that would motivate people to return the goods? Why would they bring them back to us? And I suppose this is something that was covered in the last module a little bit, but it's that some people consider that these products still have some residual value to them, even though they're not functioning. So we have to really try and understand the customer, the psyche of the customer, and what is it that they want, and how can we get them to give us the solar waste or non-functioning solar products. We've considered many things. So we've considered, do we focus on our reason for collecting the waste, or do we focus on their reason for bringing it back? Research has shown us, also across developed and less developed economies, that a lot of people, or most people, are motivated by money, so are motivated by a potential saving. So for example, if you wanted people that have access to the grid to reduce their energy consumption, you might tell them that if they switch off the lights, they might save money. You don't necessarily start telling them about climate change and the environment. And in the same way, we've looked at various research, and we believe that it might not be necessary to tell the customers about the risk or the danger, or we don't want to do any kind of scaremongering. As far as we're concerned, a non-functioning solar product in a person's home is not a huge risk or hazard to their health. We're only trying to say, if it has no use to you, then bring it back to us and we'll give you a product at a discount. We're not going to go into the details that this is a cost to us. We're not trying to buy their old waste from them. And we are also thinking about not even using the term e-waste. We're just going to talk about non-functioning solar product. If you have a non-functioning solar product in your home, then bring it to a D-Light service center and you'll be eligible for a discount on a new one. This is essentially the crux of what we've gotten it down to now. As I mentioned, these are things that are all going to be tested, and we might find that over time we decide to use one area to talk about the real reasons and the dangers and about e-waste. But for now, it's not really a part of our plan. And then the other thing is really about the delivery of the message. So who is going to deliver this message and how? We've looked at various different forms of delivering messages. Of course, there's radio, community radio. There are flyers. Of course, flyers come with their own issues, and that they're also a form of waste in the end. And do people really respond to flyers? And then verbally. So verbally, we think about using our sales agents and other D-Light customers to essentially spread the word in the regions that we are targeting. So that leads me on to this next point, which is about how do we reach our target populations. As I mentioned briefly in the introduction, when we have sold solar lanterns in the past, we have never collected data from customers. When we sell pay-as-you-go systems, we do, and therefore we have their phone number, and we could have done targeted SMS campaign, but as we don't have the numbers, we can't really do that this time. And so therefore we are thinking about other ways of reaching customers, and then we're also thinking about changing the way that we sell lanterns so that in the future we would have data and that we would be able to reach them in the future. So bearing in mind that we don't have any clear data on where most of our solar lanterns have been sold, the only thing that we have is more macro data where we can see over the past 12 years how many units have been sold in Kenya and through which distribution centers they were sold. And that's how we selected the two regions that we were going to focus on. But we'll still have some challenges around which are the actual target households, where do we believe there may be products that are non-functioning. And I suppose in a manner, this is very similar to what we do when we look for new customers. When we're looking to sell new solar lanterns, we certainly do a mapping of the geography, and we consider where groupings of people are or where people come together to meet. And so in the same way, we'll probably follow that same line as a means of reaching our target population. We certainly, at D-Light, we have got a large footprint in Kenya, and across the two regions that we've selected, we have a couple of hundred D-Light service centers. But even still, it might be that these service centers are at a significant distance from the customer's home. And therefore, we're still discussing internally about whether we try and get the customer to go to the service center to drop the product, or if the sales agent can actually take the product from the customer in their home and then carry it back to the service center to drop it. The real key here is that in order to get the non-functioning solar product back, we believe we need to provide them with a new product at a discount. In order to do that, we need to collect data. So for us, it's not going to be possible to be using the informal sector, for example. It would, well, we wouldn't be able to collect the data, then we wouldn't know how long the product had not been working, why they want to bring it back, or anything like that. So unfortunately for us, everything that we do needs to be handled by us, at least for this pilot. Which leads me on to, this is my last point, the last challenge that I'm going to go over today, and it's around effective incentivization. As I mentioned, we're thinking about we will certainly be giving a discount on a new product when someone returns some solar e-waste. But when we are thinking about, well, how much should that discount be? There are a couple of things that we took into consideration. One is the cost to the customer of returning a product. So that's in terms of the actual time that it will take them to bring it back to us, and any bus fare that they may have to pay. I say bus, but it could be not a bus, but a fare in any case that they have to pay to reach us. Another thing which I imagine was discussed in the last module is the perceived value of this end-of-life product. As the customer has invested in the product, what do they think that it's worth now? And then the third consideration that we thought of is, do they need a new product? What alternative have they been using since their product stopped functioning? We imagine that in some cases, for the lowest income households, some people may have gone back to using a candle for lighting or an oil lamp of some kind. When we think about these two considerations, we can put a kind of cost on the time and the fare to return a product, and we can also do we have some understanding around the needs for new products. The one thing that we haven't taken into account when we've made our decision is the perceived value of the end-of-life product, because that's something which is largely beyond our control. It's something that we could have really gone into a rabbit hole, and it's something that we don't believe actually adds value to our considerations. So what we've done is we've come up with an amount that we'll provide as a discount, and we'll test it. If we see that many people are bringing back waste because they think that incentive, that discount is good, then that's fantastic. And if we find that no one is bringing it back, maybe we have to increase the amount. Everything will be tested, as I said, everything will be documented, and then everything will be shared at the end of the pilot. And that is it. That's everything that I have for you. If you have any questions for me, I'll now be able to answer them.
Cool. Thank you very much, Charlotte. That was fantastic. So yeah, if anybody does have any questions, then please raise their hand or type it in the box. But perhaps I can get the ball rolling. So you mentioned that naturally for companies, as long as it is seen as a cost center, as long as the take back and the transport and the recycling costs money, then it's going to be a difficult thing for them for a company to scale up. How do you see the kind of the longer term? What would success look like for D-Light that could turn it into a value-adding proposition? Is it around the marketing element and customer acquisition and retention, or how are you looking at that?
Yeah, absolutely. That certainly is a great question. When we imagine this, when we think about it going forward, as I mentioned, e-waste is a cost center for us. But we are a social impact enterprise, and we are attempting to impact people's lives in a positive way. And we know that by providing access to energy, that is one way, but then we don't also want to have these unintended consequences of creating mountains of e-waste that can be harmful to the environment and to people's health. So there is a consideration there for us around whether it is also our responsibility to do this, because it is the right thing to do. The other thing, of course, is within some DLIGHT countries, there is e-waste regulation coming in. So there will also be some consideration around being compliant with the law. But if there is no law, and if we do just think about our own operations, indeed, we would hope that the outcome of this shows that we have been able to acquire new customers. We have been able to acquire new customers that are the lowest income customers that may have bought a cheap, non-quality verified solar product, which broke, and then they've had to go back to using a kerosene lamp or using a candle. And at DLIGHT, it's our mission to try and really reduce the use of that. And therefore, if we're able to provide a discounted product which enables this lower income household to actually buy a quality verified lantern, then that's great for us. We certainly hope that there is some customer acquisition. Then the other thing is that we hope that the data can feed in more upstream into DLIGHT operations. So the way that it happens at the moment is the products were designed to be as cheap as possible and as durable as possible. But now we see that those aren't the only considerations. We also need to consider how can they be disposed of. Therefore, the data that we get out of this can feed back into the design of our products. So new products being designed should be designed in a way where we can extend their life, or when their life can no longer be extended, that we can actually recycle and dispose of them more easily.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that. And I understand that's one of the aims of the extended producer responsibility regulation, is for to encourage companies to think of the full life cycle and look at the kind of the benefits and costs and optimize around that from an environmental perspective as well. So yeah, it's I suppose promising for regulators to hear that that is already starting to come through. Another question that I have, that Courtney Paisley has asked a question, but I'll come on to that in a second. So you said that if a consumer brings back one product, then DLIGHT will give a discount on kind of one product, right? I mean, I suppose if you're looking to optimize around take back, you would say, like, you could bring in and kind of drop off as many products as you like and get a discount. Is it do you know what I mean? You can be strict on that, kind of like that one-for-one swap, or we kind of accept larger amounts if a consumer brings it in?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. These are great questions and things that we have thought about. One consideration that we've had is that we need to make sure that what we take back is really a solar. It's a solar system. Therefore, we believe it needs to have at least a panel and a battery. What we don't want is to be encouraging people to steal other people's solar panels and bringing those in. So we want them to be able to bring back something which has been a system. The other thing we want to be sure is that this is not working. We're not trying to get back products that people have potentially purchased on pay-as-you-go with another company. They don't want to pay it back anymore, and then they just want to bring it to us and get a discount on a new product. So we do have some kind of criteria around what we consider we would collect, and it's mainly that it's a system and that it's non-functioning. Then when it comes to, can customers bring back more than one item, they absolutely can. It's possible that people do have more than one item, or it could be that they group together and one person travels to the service center. But as I mentioned, we would like to collect data around each of the systems that is returned. Therefore, we prefer that the person that brings it back is the person that was actually using it. And maybe this is a challenge that we'll come across if people are bringing in multiple units, as certainly something that we'll keep our eye out for.
Cool, thank you. Now, a question from Courtney Paisley from Sunny Money in Zambia. She asks, You said that you don't talk about health or environmental hazards when you tell people about the take back, and that research has shown that old solar products are not a real hazard. So 2 questions. One, can you provide any data or information that indicates that this is not a health or environmental hazard? And 2, what do you tell them is the reason that you are taking it back?
Okay, great questions. Thanks, Courtney. When I say that we don't tell them that it's a health or an environmental hazard, the reason why is because we're looking to take back whole solar products that are sitting gathering dust in people's homes. We are not seeking to reduce solar e-waste in dump sites, going into garbage. We're not looking to reduce solar waste where people are going through trying to salvage parts. If we were, then absolutely we would need to be addressing the health and environmental hazard. When you have a D-light lantern and it's reached the end of its life, likely because the battery is no longer holding the charge, then having a product like that sitting on your side in your house, it's really not posing any danger to anybody. And that's the reason why we haven't really thought about focusing on that. Because often what can happen with a message is that it can be twisted, it can be misunderstood. And what we believe is that the simplest message is the easiest one for people to take on board. And therefore, if we say to people, if you have a non-functioning solar product in your home, bring it back to D-Light and you'll get a discount on a new one, then we don't feel that we necessarily need to go into the detail and the reason as to why we're collecting it. We certainly don't want to keep anything a secret. Everything will be open. If a customer asks why we're taking it back, then of course we'll be willing to go into detail. But the reason why we've decided to keep it simple is because we believe, and we have found in the past, that the simplest messages are the most effective ones. So therefore, if we focus on, get a discount on a new D-Light product, that's the headline. Then the line underneath is when you bring back a non-functioning solar product. Around, do I have any data on that? I mean, there's certain research that I've read around the kind of messages which are best received by customers, and also around, let's see, you asked about the health and environmental hazard. So I don't have anything around that in particular, but for the reasons that I mentioned in the beginning.
Cool. Yeah, good question. Thanks for the answer, Charlotte. I noticed that we have someone from Sophie's group on the line, who is the environmental and sustainability consultancy that I know has done a number of studies on this. Rueda, are you able to add anything to this point around the environmental and health hazards from solar lanterns in people's homes? I know that some of the DFID studies that Sophie's did included content on this.
Yeah, hi. Hi everyone. I wasn't particularly involved in those studies. Excuse me, I'm a bit sick. It was more my colleague Federico and Joe. But yeah, we definitely did some work on it. So if you guys have any questions, you can just email me and I can pass on some information. Yeah, but thank you for the presentation, Charlotte. It's very interesting. Actually.
Cool. Thank you, Rueda, and sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, cool. I'm sorry to not feeling well.
I mean, I can maybe add a few comments on that from my overview of knowledge on this, but it's probably also good to get an input from Federico or so on. But I imagine that they wouldn't be hazardous, as the consumer products lying around in the homes. But once they start maybe getting dismantled or anything like this, this could potentially be hazardous, and it may also go into informal recycling channels, either for collection or for refurbishment. And this could then potentially lead to some kind of hazards then if they're giving it into the wrong collection channels or maybe just throwing it away in nature. If this gets picked up, then I'm not sure. I don't really know the D-Light product myself very well, if it's just like a solar lantern or integrated, but potentially there you would then have risks that these lithium-ion batteries would be a danger, but then again, it could also be that these are of the lower explosive variety, let's say. Maybe Charlotte has a bit more knowledge on that than I do.
Sorry, you were going to say something, Drew. I was just going to say that from our experience, we certainly haven't had any issues in terms of explosion with any of our products. Indeed, the batteries are tiny and the chemistry is very stable. I agree that when the products do start getting dismantled, you're absolutely right, there is more of an issue. And as I mentioned at the beginning, and I don't like to make this an excuse, but really the scope of the pilot is relatively limited, and we are really focusing truly on take back. That's everything that we're trying to test here. There are other considerations, such as when the waste has left somebody's house and it already is with informal collectors or is in a waste heap somewhere. But unfortunately, at the moment, that isn't something that we are able to look at. But we hope that this will really kick D-Light, and hopefully more wider in the industry, for us to start looking at this and to start exploring what happens to other products that haven't been taken back, but that have not stayed in the home of the customer. But unfortunately, that's not under the scope of this pilot.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. And I was just going to add what we found in the first module was on a kind of a technical introduction to recycling off-grid solar products. That the principal hazard for lithium iron phosphate batteries is when they are when there is a kind of a collection and a large number of them are aggregated. Maybe a lot of lithium batteries are dropped into a single bin without being fully discharged. Then there is a potential for a thermal runaway, and that could be a cause of fire. But for that, you would need a large number kind of held in a small spot. And indeed, for a product in a customer's home, that the chemistry within there is stable and not non-toxic, so represents a limited hazard. But yeah, like Charlotte says, I think it's not seeking to make excuses, and I think there still is a responsibility for stakeholders to think of the full life cycle, and avoiding huge waste streams distributed across these countries of operation. Cool. We heard very briefly from Daniel there, who's our next panelist. So I suggest we move on. Thanks very much, Charlotte. Hope you can stay on the line and contribute to the discussion a bit later. Daniel, let me switch the panel to you. Yeah, cool. Thank you. So yeah, quick introduction. Daniel is the advisor for circular economy and sustainable waste management at GIZ, and has been working closely with the STEP initiative on that's solving the e-waste problem, and has got fantastic experience from this. So yeah, look forward to hearing from you, Daniel. Please take it away.
Thanks very much, Drew. Just a quick question: is this now showing as 2 screens or 1 screen?
2 screens.
2 screens. Okay. And let me just try again, but taking off my monitor. Don't know why this always happens. Okay, and hopefully now it's 1 screen.
You see, there's always this. Yeah, that's 1 screen. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Cool, thank you.
Don't know if this is in the way. Great. So thanks very much for the introduction. And as Drew said, I'm working on this topic of e-waste management at GIZ based in Germany. And we've been looking at this topic of informal-formal partnerships and how you can integrate the informal sector into formal e-waste formal e-waste operations for a number of years now. So why do we think this is an important topic, and why does it need to be looked at in detail? Well, as you may know, I guess from the other webinars, only 20% of the e-waste collected and recycled worldwide is going through formal recycling routes. And actually the highest share of e-waste being managed worldwide is in the informal sector. And often this is happening under really bad working conditions and causing a lot of environmental damage. So if you don't actually look to work with the informal sector in countries where they are very established and playing a major role, then it can be that you're either setting up a parallel e-waste management system, which is in competition with the informal sector, and this makes everything difficult for all stakeholders. But it could also be that you just don't get any of the e-waste. So it's really important from our point of view that you try to find ways to work with the informal sector and also get a win-win from the value in e-waste and the livelihood potential that this has, and connect that up to the formal e-waste management system. But we've also been looking at some of these partnerships in the past and seen that it's not always that easy, and there's been a lot of mixed success. So some have been more successful than others. And because of this, we wanted to look into this a bit more in detail. And during the last year or two, we've been working on trying to develop a publication in the STEP initiative on different case studies and partnerships which have been applied worldwide, and see which kind of lessons learned we can get from this. So STEP, if you didn't know it already, is solving the e-waste problem. This is a global multi-stakeholder initiative with representatives from government, industry, and international organizations and universities. And it addresses different topics. And in this case, we've set up a working group within the initiative to develop this paper on informal and formal partnerships. So I want to give you a few insights to this paper, which we're hoping to publish in early next year, which looks at some of the case studies across the world. We brought in cases from Peru, India, Nigeria, South Africa, and Ghana. And a lot of the research that has been done so far and a lot of the pilots that have been tried together with the informal sector have been done in India. So really one of the aims of this paper was to take in a bit more of a worldwide perspective. And once we have some of these recommendations together, we're looking to try and bring these international initiatives and international partnerships, also with producers and manufacturers and governments. So I'm quite happy that we can bring some of these insights to you today. So just to recap, I'm not sure how much has been in the other webinars, but I'll just start again with who is the informal sector and which kind of possibilities do we have for partnerships here. So it's difficult to define an exact entity as the informal sector, but the basic characteristics are that it's normally workers or businesses which are not officially registered. They may have no legal contracts with clients. They're outside of tax control and social or labor market protection provisions. They're normally working on very diversified activities across the e-waste recycling chain. This can be collection, sorting, dismantling, or recycling, but also they can be very talented at refurbishment. And normally this is a subsistence activity to try and earn enough money to live by individuals or families or other groupings of people. But it can also extend towards larger businesses, which are, let's call them unofficial businesses, which are also not kind of formally recognized or registered in the country where they're operating. That's not to say that formal businesses are always operating to environmentally friendly and sound operations in different countries. And they can also be unorganized, or they can be organized into different associations or groups of workers. So when we look at kind of trying to formalize these operations or trying to give a role for them in a e-waste management system, you can look at the activities and decide, which ones are safe or safer and which ones are maybe a bit more dangerous and need to be stopped. And if you look at collection and sorting, training with dismantling, you can actually do a lot of this activity still with these kind of experienced informal collectors or dismantlers. Once you move into recycling, it gets a bit more critical because obviously there are a lot of practices there, like burning of cables or just smelting lead in your back garden. This is really not a safe activity to do. So for these kind of activities, either formalization is needed or upgrading of the activities or shifting the activities into other more sustainable processes is needed. So if we have a look at the circular economy model, I'm sure most of you have seen the kind of normal circular economy model where retail sells to consumers, they bring it to formal take-back systems, and it goes into recycling. And this is then reused, materials reused for production. In lower middle income countries where there's no formal recycling infrastructure and often no legislation, you have a situation where actually it gets to the consumer and either they will throw it out with household waste, or you have an informal collector who will come to your household. He will either offer to take it away for free or also buy it from you. And this is quite attractive. So in the example before on D-Light, this could also be happening depending on where you're based, but it could be that an informal collector comes and offers to buy your old device off you. And they can do this because they then sell it to informal recyclers, who then burn it to get the valuable resources out of it, or use other processes to get these resources. A lot of the resources are lost along the way, but actually they do make it back into some kind of production. So it's still a circular economy, but it's very inefficient and it's leading to a lot of environmental damage. But this informal collection is actually an amazing service, and it's kind of filling the gap for public authorities. And the question is, well, how can we develop incentives that these informal collectors actually bring it to a formal recycler? So we're still using their talents, but we cut out this informal recycling aspect. And that's the question of using incentives and what kind of incentives are suitable for this. So you have often the case in different countries of either there's an EPR legislation on the way or it's been put in place, or there's no legislation and you have to kind of see what role producers can take on a voluntary initiative to try to engage with informal sector. These partnerships can take the form of informal collectors organize themselves into an association, or they interact with an interface agency, let's say. So this could be an aggregator in the informal sector who's collecting from different informal collectors. It could be a cooperative of informal collectors. It could also be a producer responsibility organization who acts as a kind of interface between producers or other financing streams and direct relationship with informal collectors. And if you look at the diagram below, this kind of shows kind of the theoretical background. In the case of an EPR system, or where you have a producer who's prepared to pay for some kind of e-waste management, they sell the product to consumers, and the consumer will still probably give it to the informal collector. But this informal collector that should then hopefully bring it to the interface agency, be it a producer responsibility organization, an aggregator, or some kind of NGO. And this NGO is paid then to be able to provide incentives to the informal collector, and they then pass it on through to a formal recycler. And by doing this, you're able to then bypass this informal recycling chain, but also integrate at least some of the informal sector into the formal system. So that's the theory. And there's a number of different ways you can actually look at partnering with the informal sector. It doesn't have to be a model like this necessarily, but you know, it could also be an NGO who's locally decided this is a role they would like to play to kind of support informal sector. Excuse me, to join hands with waste management and formalize. excuse me. It could also be that you have a recycler locally who, in the case of there being no legislation or also legislation in play, he may decide, well, actually the informal sector is collecting much better than I am, and it represents a really useful collection channel, maybe also for dismantling, and it may also be relevant for this formal recycler to engage with informal collectors. And there have been cases of this happening in Nigeria where the recyclers is helping to train them and also develop them into an association so that they're working kind of together in tandem. So one of the main issues which makes it difficult to get hold of the e-waste is that there's a price gap between informal recycling and the formal recycling sector. And that's because the informal sector has externalized all of their environmental costs, social costs, and health costs. And as a result, it's very difficult for the formal sector to compete. So one of the main issues is trying to figure out how can you convince the informal sector to join hands and bring the e-waste to you, and how can you channel it out. And this slide is showing an example in India where some of the prices, I think that was actually maybe developed by colleagues of Rueda by Sophie's. The price that it is for mobile phones and mobile phone boards in the formal and informal sector, and you can see that actually 40% higher price is offered for mobile phones without batteries in the informal sector. And where there is legislation in place for an EPR scheme, you can actually maybe leverage on this to bring financing into the system and say, well, okay, well, actually the producers can cover this gap. It's not huge. Maybe we can pay for access for this if you can establish the right price. If there's no legislation in place, then it can still be addressed by voluntary initiatives from producers, or you can look to cooperate on other means. But this is a major issue, and it's often kind of one of the reasons why these partnerships struggle is that if there's no EPR legislation in place, then the financing is not there to cover this in the long term once a project ends. So what kind of incentives can sustain these partnerships? On the one hand, it's the financial incentives. So this can be financial subsidies. They can be based on the market price for the materials, what the informal sector is somehow getting for them. Or you can offer minimum price guarantees, which is maybe interesting when there's volatile prices in the market. It could also just be to offer the informal collectors a fixed salary if they work in collaboration with you. Might be a lower price, but actually it could be more reliable income stream for them than what they currently have. Just as important are non-financial incentives. Otherwise, the informal sector doesn't understand what's going on and maybe is not working to a sustainable degree. And this can be anything from trainings through to supporting them to create associations, organize themselves, and advocate for workers' rights. It can be ID cards or proof that you're working together with them. And if the authorities have just developed a legislation which makes it illegal to do what they're doing, then the fact that they have a certificate that shows that they are working with formal recyclers together can be advantageous for them. It can also mean that they get their tax issues taken care of if the formal entity is paying tax, and this makes their operations legal. And it can also be things like equipment, protective gear for working, or educational services. So we did some analysis during 2017 on a number of past pilots and tried to figure out what are the success factors which can be applied more generally. And what we found was that, as I said before, that the financial incentive is fairly crucial, and this wasn't in place before. But now actually the EPR system seems to be working to a better degree, and this financial incentive can be offered to a number of PROs who are collaborating with informal sectors. But one of the main things to first do is to map out what does your local informal sector look like and what are they doing. If you want to collaborate with them, trust is very important, and civil society organizations can bridge this trust gap if they've been active together with these kind of workers for a longer time. and then they can really provide this interface to connect with them. In either case, this interface agency, as it's called it, should take on a role of the mediator and communicate between the informal collectors, respecting their needs, but also aligning these with the expectations of producers or producer responsibility organizations. As I mentioned before, trust is very important. So it's important to identify the right individuals who can take this forward in the local community and build the trust. And these partnerships often take a lot of patience to set up and need to be kind of there for the long term. And this is where it's important to find these individuals. So working out the right agreements, these can be binding agreements, they can be non-binding, and different protocols of how you want to work together with a different mix of incentives is key to success. But it's also important to make sure that you respect the entrepreneurial character of the informal workers. They're used to working on their own or being micro-entrepreneurs, if you like. So it's important that these agreements are able to be flexible over time, respect the informal workers, but yeah, I think this is the point in the end as well, where you have close monitoring and regularly evaluate the partnership that you've set up so that it can be adapted over time. And in these studies or the analysis of the past pilots, we found that a lot of different incentives were used, many of them non-financial, because the producers weren't paying into the EPR system. And these non-financial incentives can go partway to bridging the price gap, at least in the Indian case. But in the end, you also needed this additional kind of incentive on the price side to persuade them to bring the waste to the various initiatives, or just to kind of make sure that this initiative could last longer in the long term. And that said, non-financial incentives are really important to also have at the same time as the financial ones to build up trust. So an example of a PRO where this is now working quite well is Karasambhav. Following the revision of the 2016 e-waste rules in India, producers had to meet new collection targets for e-waste. And although this was not mentioned, there's some scope for partnering with the informal sector to reach these collection targets, which are rapidly increasing. It's really important that you have all the available collection channels open. And Karasambhav is a service operator for different producers in India, a producer responsibility organization. And they built on experiences from past pilots, which were made with Nokia, and decided they were going to target the e-waste aggregators in the chain to really utilize the existing informal collection networks which feed into these e-waste aggregators and collect e-waste across different cities in India. But they've been using a different approach in different cities, depending on whether there are NGOs available. But otherwise, these aggregators have been a key linchpin for them. And the way that they approached them was to offer them a similar price to what the informal sector was paying. But this alone is not enough. They also then convinced them to try out this new digital payments and said that they'd pay their tax for them. And there's a big tax drive right now in India. So for the informal aggregators, this was quite attractive to have all the tax issues taken over and become legal. And on the other hand, these digital payments meant they were not sitting on large wads of cash, and they got paid directly straight away. There are other instances where informal traders might just run off with the money or the waste. So for them, this is an advantage to working with Karasambhav. And once they see the advantages, actually, the word spreads by word of mouth, that this is a good way to cooperate. So this has been one way that they've been able to collect over 3,000 tons of e-waste in the first 2 years in collaboration with over 5,000 e-waste aggregators. Through the electronic payments and digital documentation of transactions and flows, they've been able to trace where the e-waste is going. And the aggregators, when they want to work together with Karasambhav, they have to sign a code of conduct, which requires them to meet environmental, health and safety standards. So as I just mentioned, these digital payments are actually quite an interesting way to approach working with the informal sector. The direct payments often come with transaction fees, but it removes some of the middlemen and makes it a bit more reliable for these informal collectors or aggregators. And you can also reduce the potential for corruption or bribes and enable tax compliance through this. And we've been trialing this in a much larger scale, or definitely not larger scale than Karasamba, but we've been trialing this as GIZ Ghana in Agbogbloshie, which is the famous e-waste scrapyard in Ghana. And here there was a trial which was conducted by UCO Institute to buy cables out of the informal sector. And these were then weighed, and pictures were taken of the scales with the weight on the balance. And this way they could track which cables have been brought in, make sure that there's not double counting. And the e-waste informal collectors would then get a payment through mobile money. And these cables would then be transferred across to a formal recycler who would shred them and recycle them appropriately instead of burning them, which is the standard practice on Agbogbloshie. They started out with a low price and increased this gradually to try and find the right price in the market. And the idea is that this is not just standalone, but the Ghana e-waste bill from 2016 stipulates that a fund will be set up to channel e-waste out of the informal sector. And this fund should then hopefully be used at these transfer stations to collect e-waste and pay for the e-waste to come out. So it's kind of like an EPR scheme, but based on an eco-levy of goods coming into the country, pay an eco-levy, and this goes into this fund for e-waste management. So why should you pursue this if it takes a lot of time and effort actually to set up? Well, for producers, if you really want to meet these collection and recycling targets of an EPR system, or even in your own company, you're using the existing structures for collection in the country, and this can be an interesting additional collection channel. It helps you to uplift people who are currently suffering from the worst environmental impacts of e-waste and achieve your corporate social CSR goals. For authorities, it's a way to increase or make sure that you're not just kind of making informal sector illegal overnight. You can increase your chances of meeting your pollution control standards or recycling targets, involve a lot of people into the e-waste management system, and reduce the administrative efforts for enforcement, because you don't have to then tackle all of the informal sector at once. And for the informal sector, well, if you're being threatened with a new legislation which will make you illegal, well, this is a way to make sure that your work is being recognized, you gain visibility, and you can find a new role for yourself in the new formal e-waste system that's coming. Obviously, you avoid health risks, and maybe you can also improve your managerial skills, set up your own business, and raise revenue by having more direct collaboration with recyclers instead of circumventing to middlemen. Sorry, instead of selling to middlemen. So I mentioned it's not always easy, and there are a lot of challenges, and one of them is having the local contacts to the informal sector. As I mentioned before, there are some recommendations on how you can overcome this. There is a lack of information on the informal sector often at the local level when you want to start here. So as I said, mapping this is useful. And really it needs some kind of long-term engagement from producers or PROs or recyclers to kind of make sure that there's financing there to continue with such initiatives. And the example of India showed that it was difficult until this EPR legislation was in place, but now that producers are prepared to pay for this, then actually it's a lot is happening in this space. Informal collectors don't always have access to large quantities of e-waste, so for them it can be also a good opportunity to work with larger recyclers and have a chance to work on more e-waste. But this is obviously not always reliable for your collection system. And some of the provisions in legal text don't necessarily make these kind of partnerships easy, or they don't lower the risk, let's say. So within this step paper, we've set out a number of steps on how to move towards these kind of good partnerships. And as I mentioned, one of the first ones is to understand the local mechanisms and involve local leaders and NGOs. It's to if there's an extended producer responsibility legislation in place, then you can develop a plan on how you can meet this and try to make this inclusive and find ways to integrate the informal sector within this. If you're working together with the informal sector, then offer simple mechanisms for registration and reporting so that it's not overly complex for them, and provide long-term support and work together with recyclers who are interested in pursuing these kind of inclusive approaches. Authorities can try to leave room and enable transitional phases to set up these kind of organizational structures so that informal sector does not become illegal overnight and they have a chance to find their way into a formal recycling system. And they can also support this process through trainings or similar initiatives which promote this kind of partnerships and establish clear guidance on how to monitor quantities throughout the chain. So you know it's not just going back into the informal recycling sector after it's been collected. The informal sector has to, of course, be prepared to enter minimal forms of organization with you. They need to accept minimum forms of reporting and transparency, which are obviously going to be needed if you're trying to contract these kind of partners. You have to find flexible ways to work with them. And of course, they won't be at the same level as formal partners in terms of doing business. So they have to be open to change on this. And they also have to be open to restrict their practices to the safer aspects of e-waste management. Recyclers can support this process and also help to franchise the formal recycling partnerships. They can also promote this idea to producers and PROs who they're working with. So this is another useful actor to engage in this regard. And there are some standards which have been developed. To name one, it's the ISO guidance principles for secondary metals or sustainable management of secondary metals. This outlines a few ways in which, let's say the secondary materials chain can become more sustainable and integrate informal workers into, the recycling practice. And once these kind of standards become operational, then there will be secondary material streams coming hopefully from more sustainable practice, and it would be potentially interesting for buyers of materials to look for these streams coming from sustainable recycling practice, and maybe also to pay premiums for these more sustainable materials. So I also added a slide on how this is relevant for the solar sector. It's really good to see that a lot of companies are now becoming interested in this topic. For me personally, I think solar companies have a really huge role to play in setting a positive example and pushing for sustainable recycling infrastructure and a safe management of their products, like we saw in the presentation before on D-Light. The main fractions coming out are, of course, the cables, batteries, panels, and charge controllers, but also the accessories associated with the solar home systems, like televisions or other related appliances. So I think here it's important to make sure that the different fractions are being collected in the best way possible. In countries where there's no legislation, the valuable components will, of course, find their way into informal sector recycling. And this is often the lead acid batteries in the first case, because they have a very high value, but also cables. And if these then go to informal lead smelters, for instance, or actually even being transported over smaller distances, it's likely that the sulfuric acid will be poured out on the ground by informal channels. So here it's really interesting or important to look for ways to prevent this. But this takes often a bit more of an overarching approach, where you also have enforcement mechanisms from government to avoid the worst practice and shut down the offending lead smelters, let's say. But working with informal sector to channel it, or finding ways to get these batteries back to formal centers for recycling is important. On the other hand, you have lithium-ion batteries and solar lanterns, which have normally very low recycling value. These are likely not to be collected by the informal sector. So as we saw before, it's a question of, okay, how can we develop incentives to retrieve these? And maybe there's also a role for the informal sector to play in this. I think potentially as well there's a role for refurbishment together with the informal sector, and this is probably happening regardless. So there it could be also interesting to look at ways to collaborate, not only in collection but also refurbishment operations. But wherever there are batteries being involved and they're being transported together in large quantities, then there will definitely be a need for additional guidance on safe handling and transport. So the presentations will be sent around. I've kind of tried to jump into a bit of a high-level overview just now. You can find a lot more information in the forthcoming STEP paper, but also a number of different publications which have tried to shed a light on this topic. There are also the standards which I mentioned here listed, and in Ghana they've also developed technical guidelines on how to integrate collectors into the e-waste management system. And the example I mentioned on the pilot payment system in Ghana will also be coming forward in a study at the beginning of next year, which will hopefully be published in January. So thanks very much for your attention. I hope that was more or less understandable. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Daniel. Fantastic. Great to have some insights from your rich experience around the world. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, then please type it into the question box or raise your hand. I'd like to begin by asking, so the off-grid solar sector, if you look at where the customers are based, there are some in kind of urban and peri-urban centres that are kind of either weak grid or edge of grid customers, but a large proportion are in rural areas, perhaps remote and distributed. To what extent would you say the informal sector is active in those areas, in rural trading centres and villages? I mean, are they present, or is it just a kind of a feature of the urban economy?
I mean, a lot of the informal recycling activities take place in, of course, in the urban environment where there's a lot more e-waste going around. Mm-hmm. I can imagine the most valuable components may find their way back into informal recycling systems, but it's very much a question of how the local context looks like. And I think this is an area where I'm hoping some of these Global Leap Solar Challenge projects will be able to shed a bit more light on exactly what's happening with these rural contexts. Mm-hmm. My assumption would be that the lithium ion products are kind of just left somewhere or just kept in households. But I could imagine that if there is some kind of waste management collection happening, or people who are traveling regularly to the city, that they may still find a way to go to different consumers and pick up lead acid batteries. And depending on where you are in the world, of course, it's always a very different situation with the informal sector. There are some countries where they have a really diversified chain and they're recycling to a very high level, or not, but let's say a very, lots of different components are being separated and recycled, and not in an environmentally friendly way. And then you have other countries where there's not much awareness yet, and the informal sector is not really established. They might collect a bit, but they don't really know what to do with it, and they haven't really realized there's a value in there yet. So in those places, it may just be lying around until someone comes along. Mm-hmm. You see examples, for instance, I think in Myanmar, where when the solar home system breaks, they will normally swap out the lead acid battery with a cheap Chinese one, and these lead acid batteries will then find their way probably into an informal recycling structure, mm-hmm. Because they know that there's a lot arriving, and this may also happen when someone goes to get their new battery from a local market. Then they may also take their old battery with them and exchange it somehow. Yeah, but I don't know. I think there's more research needed on that aspect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. And I started off this webinar presenting the three channels: the company-owned, third-party collection centres, and the informal sector. But do you see those three channels as being kind of mutually supportive? You can try and develop all 3 channels and it's part of a an effective ecosystem, or do you think it's kind of better to select and optimize around one of those channels?
Probably to start with, it's probably better to try to select and optimize one channel. Would be my guess. I can imagine particularly where you have this customer relationship and some kind of control over the waste stream, where you are maybe setting up a customer relationship with a solar home system or something like this, and you can track where it is. This makes sense to try to make sure you keep control of this as much as possible. Once it's going into more diverse, spread out e-waste, so for instance, solar lanterns might just be sold to distributors and then dispersed everywhere. I can imagine that this might then need to look at a few different channels of how to get things back, because it's not so easy to pinpoint and locate. And mini grids, of course, you have you know exactly when things are supposed to be exchanged and swapped out, and this makes it a lot easier to try to channel that into the right recycling stream. But there's no reason why you shouldn't try to kind of identify local collection structures which exist already and see if there's ways to use synergies with these.
Cool. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So certainly something for the sector to consider as it matures and more of the products reach end of life and into the waste stream. Cool, thank you very much, Daniel. I haven't seen any questions come through. We have, I see Michael Koech on the line from Safaricom. And Michael, I know that Safaricom have got experience with working with third-party collection centres across Kenya to try and obtain the mobile phone handsets when they reach end of life. Are you able to share some insights of your experience on that? It shows you're self-muted. If you're there and attentive, you can unmute and say a few words. Maybe Michael is not at his desk right now. Cool. Okay. Well, in that case, I'd like to move on with the agenda and have a quick poll question for the audience. And it's coming from something that we put in a briefing note 3 around the financials of off-grid solar waste. And in that there was a presentation by Federico Magalini of Sophie's, who said that for off-grid solar waste that has a negative value, it is recommended not to put a cash incentive on that, because it's likely to set a precedent in people's mindset that is difficult to shift and financially unsustainable for the sector. And I think in fairness, he was referring to the entry-level product category, the solar lanterns that do have a negative value. And when we published this, we had some pushback from our members who said, we feel this is a bit hasty, and for our larger systems that may have components that are larger or more hazardous, then we would want to put a cash incentive on that. So we'd like to just open this up for a quick discussion, starting off with a poll question to see what you think. So the question is, should off-grid solar companies use cash incentives to increase take-back? And we're looking for people to answer either no, never, only for certain components, or it's too early to say, / I don't know. Please fill out your are your answers. Cool, so we have a few votes coming in. Maybe Daniel or Charlotte, can you remind me? Can you see the poll in progress, or do I have to announce the results? I'm not sure if people can see where we're at.
I can see the poll in progress, although it says that it's for attendees only, so I can't participate.
Ah, you can participate. So that begs the question, what would you respond?
I would respond, no, never.
No, never. Okay. Daniel, how would you respond?
I can't see the poll yet because I'm trying to figure out what's going with my monitors. But yeah, I would struggle to make a spot decision, I think. So maybe I would also go with the, what is it, no, never means definitely maybe or something like this. I don't know.
I was trying to be clearer than that. So no, never is that cash incentives should never be used to bring back off-grid solar products or their components. So far, Charlotte is the only person that responded to that. We have 29% of respondents saying only for certain components, and 71% saying it's too early to say, / I don't know.
Okay, I would be on the third one, I think, until I had looked at it a bit closer.
Okay, thank you. Also hesitant to say.
Yeah.
Does any of the attendees, would they like to unmute themselves and share their perspective? I see Azuri, Joe, you're on the line. Would you like to say a word or two on this? Sorry for putting you on the spot.
That's fine. Am I muted right now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm in the office right now, so you might have some background noise, unfortunately. But yes, so we've spoken a bit about this, and I think that we just feel right now we are sort of too early to be deciding sort of to never use cash incentives. I think we understand, having spoken to Federico, that the potential issues with cash incentives, but I think that it's sort of the most, I suppose a naive person would say it's the most obvious initial idea, and to sort of completely put that off the table to start with, I think is a bit odd at such an early stage. It may be that it's not the best idea, but I think at this stage it really is a bit early to be completely putting it off the table.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. And Rueda, like we said, this was initially sparked from some advice from your colleague Federico. I wonder if you have anything to add to the discussion.
Am I in? Oh yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I've just unmuted you.
Initially, Federico said that statement because I think what he was most afraid of is if it was some cash incentives, some other people, I mean, it wouldn't really prohibit some other people saying, oh, but we can give you more cash, and it would be a bit difficult to control. But I think my opinion is it's also a bit too early to say, and we need to look a bit more into that.
Cool, thank you. So perhaps we need to revisit briefing note 3 and hedge our recommendation somewhat. Thank you for that input. And Michael, I see you've now raised your hand. Michael from Safaricom.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. I don't know whether you can hear me now.
We can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, yeah, my apologies. So I mean, if okay with everyone, I can get back to the question that you had asked me about our experience from the program that we have. Yeah, so basically,
sorry, just kick off. We're now kind of we have like 3 or 4 minutes left of the webinar, so just a brief overview before we close, and that would be fantastic.
Okay.
Sorry for
yeah,
squeezing.
thank you. So yeah, so yeah, so I mean, for us, I think Daniel has sort of described a typical way in which our EWaste program is managed in a developing country, and Kenya is one of them. So in our case, what we do is we first of all, it's about awareness. So we work with the regulator, the Communications Authority, and the National Environment Management Authority, just to design an awareness program for especially consumers to bring in their e-waste. And the biggest challenge is around collection and, of course, incentives, which I think has been discussed at length. But in our case, we have our shops spread across the country. So we have about more than 45 shops spread across the country. And we use those ones as collection centers. So customers who would be coming in ordinarily would just walk in, and if they have a phone or any other electronic for that matter, then they would drop it at the shop. We are working with a local recycler called the We Center. So we would arrange with them the logistics when we have sufficient quantities across the country. And then we pick them for simple dismantling and then recycling of the parts that can be handled within Kenya. And then most of the more difficult parts, like motherboards for computers, are actually transported outside the country for further recycling, especially in Europe. So I think in brief, that's how the logistics of collection in our case works. Of course, the biggest is, of course, again, incentives for people to bring their waste for recycling, as well as the legislation that has been in draft for a while now. And we think that once passed, then it makes e-waste management more structured because it gives specific responsibilities for producers. It's based on an EPR model. So there'll be a lot of work done by the producers themselves in terms of collection and even having contracts with recyclers who would be handling their waste based on the market share. So that in brief is how ours work. Anytime we have incentives, like small things like even t-shirts and stuff, we see a lot of e-waste coming in. When we stop, then we also see a drop in the volumes. So yeah.
Do you ever offer cash incentives, or it's always kind of merchandise and?
We don't offer cash incentives at the moment. We just use merchandise because we believe cash would be difficult to sustain in the long run. But our thinking is once the legislation comes in play, then the recyclers would have some resources to handle the problematic parts. Then, of course, now the useful parts can easily be paid for by the recyclers.
Mm-hmm. Cool, interesting. And if anybody wants to kind of see and learn about the Safaricom experience, I mean, do you have any publications or information that you could share with the group?
Yeah, we could share what we've not what I would say publication, but we can have a summary of how we run the program, a few presentations of what we've done in the past as well, our successes. I think that one we can summarize and share. Yeah,
if you wouldn't mind, that would be fantastic. I'm sure there's an interested audience among the Gogla members. Cool. Yeah, thank you very much for that input. It's always interesting to hear what the experience is from the mobile sector. Cool. Now, allow me to quickly wrap up.
I don't know if you have time for a quick comment on this incentives, or do you want to wrap up?
No, I think we could wrap up. We're already a minute or so over. But okay, yeah, if you want to share it over email, then we're happy to send it around afterwards. Cool. So a quick announcement, the application deadline for round 2 of the Solar E-Waste Challenge is in 4 days time, this Sunday. If you haven't got a proposal together and you wish to, the clock is ticking. We hope to announce the winners at the Global Off-Grid Solar Forum and Expo. If this isn't on your radar, then I'd encourage you to take a look. It's going to be a big event, and e-waste will be on the agenda in 1 or 2 places, and we will hope to see many of our members there. Otherwise, yeah, a big thank you for everybody that's been involved throughout the 6 modules, the participants, and of course the contributors from today, Charlotte, Daniel and Michael. Briefly at the end there, we very much appreciate your inputs and willingness to share. But yeah, there's nothing more from us today, so thank you very much everybody, and we look forward to being in touch and working together on off-grid solar waste in 2020. Goodbye for now.